My name is Stephen Kapos. I am a child survivor of the Holocaust, and I was 7 years old when, in March 1944, the German forces invaded Hungary because of their sudden loss of trust in the Hungarian fascist leader Admiral Horthy. And all of a sudden the fate of Hungarian Jews were very much worsened, and Eichmann came in along with the German forces and immediately set about organizing deportations, first from the countryside, and under the German influence, and it was probably more than influence, the Hungarian government started to pass ever increasingly severe legislation against Jews, restricting them, making them wear yellow star, making them live in special marked, yellow star marked buildings, etc. Not allowing them to own radios. All kinds of humiliating racist distinctions were introduced. One interesting thing about Hungary in that background context is the weakness of Zionism in Hungary.
That would be great.
Because of the Habsburg influence, they wanted to exploit the professional and middle class Jewish forces from changing from feudalism to capitalism, and it was their initiative to assimilate, and they encouraged the change of names to Hungarian sounding names if most Jewish families didn't have. I mean, my family was Cohen, and after the First World War, under influence of this assimilation drive, my father and uncle sat around a map and said, "Oh, there's a river, Kapos. Well, we'll take that."
Wow. That's fascinating. Yeah.
So it was real, and your father, he had to
It's a tiny river, by the way. I'm a bit annoyed.
And your father had to train elsewhere outside of Hungary. Am I right in thinking that? And so what's the story around that? Why was that the case?
I'm not very clear about the detail. I think he started in the Budapest University, but then they brought in a law which was called numerus clausus, which was the first racist law in Europe.
Right.
And they're very proud of our Hungarian fascists and semi-fascists were very proud that they were before Mussolini with the first racist law, and they simply said that we can't have more than X number of Jews here, there and everywhere of influence, including medical training. And my father was caught up in that, and 1 year, I'm not sure I don't think it was the starting year, but 1 year he had to do in Prague as a result, because the figures so worked out.
Wow.
And actually he enjoyed that. He said Prague was lovely. And the German university in Prague, so he had the lectures in German, not in Czech. He had no Czech. But most middle class in Hungary spoke German because of the Austria-Hungary connection. It's different now. Hardly anybody speaks German, but everybody speaks English.
So what are some of your first memories and experiences from the Holocaust, from when it started?
Well, when the Germans came in, the German army, the Wehrmacht, remember they came into an allied country. they came in because they couldn't trust the ruler and his circle anymore, because we're talking about 1944, when it was clear that Germany was losing the war, and even a sort of rather fascist or right-wing extremist inclined regime was started to think about following the Romanian example. Romania already left the alliance by then, which is why they got Transylvania back. And Horthy, Admiral Horthy, who was the autocratic ruler, began to realize that whereas previously he was accepting territories returned via Hitler's largesse from the Trianon Treaty, which cut 2/3 of the historic Hungary off Hungary, all the perimeter areas, which today created Slovakia. That was all part of Hungary. Part of a chunk of Ukraine, which is why Orban has trouble with the Ukrainian regime, because I think that a couple of 100,000 Hungarians in that area, and they are called up and killed in the current war. So Orban has a strong view about stopping the war.
Right. Yeah.
And then Transylvania, which is huge, it's a really large area, and a chunk of Serbia, and almost all of Croatia. So all around these countries have received Hungarian territories. So Hungary was reduced to a core Hungarian side of 1/3 of its historic territory. And the nationalist, right-wing, semi-fascist and later fully fascist government's main ambition was to repossess the lost territories. It was a great thing. The irredentist movement was very strong. That Hitler did give back, I think, the biggest part of, but not all of Transylvania, part of Slovakia, part of Serbia and Croatia, Not all of it, but parts of all these territories. And then the Hungarians moved in those territories, and immediately the Jews' position became catastrophic, because the Hungarians were so keen to cooperate with Germany about the eradication of Jews everywhere, much more so than the Romanians. So when these territories were Romanian, they didn't have any trouble. As soon as it went over to Hungary, deportation started.
And how was that? As a child, as I understand, you had to pretend you were a war refugee.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So when the Germans came in, immediately we didn't feel the impact, but because with the Germans came some of the Nazi leaders, and Eichmann amongst them. And Eichmann set about immediate deportations from the countryside, not Budapest to start with, but in Budapest they brought in laws that affected everybody, including those in Budapest, marking Jews by having to wear a yellow star, and sort of general humiliation business. Weren't allowed to own this or that, and you couldn't be an owner of anything much, and weren't allowed to own land. All these these are series of laws, not all at once, and then concentrated into buildings which were marked with these huge yellow stars, and we fell into that. So the first thing I remember is this being marked. But in Budapest, there wasn't much tension between the indigenous population and the Germans who came in, because inverted commas allies. And I, as a child, was very interested in all military things. Then I had tanks and guns and so on, and saluted all soldiers in the street, Hungarian, German, and I had a remark, and I was at that stage a blonde boy, and I had one comment from a German officer after I saluted, and he saluted back. He said, "What a pity this boy is not German." That's before we had to wear the yellow star.
Yeah.
And then we got involved with this Kastner business. It's quite complicated. You heard about Kastner? Okay. Well, Kastner was a very influential sort of Zionist leader from Transylvania. When Transylvania was attached back into Hungary, he came to Budapest, and he had very high connections all over the place, including the high Zionist Jewish leaders, and he was a very talented kind of actor and charismatic person, a lawyer, I think, by background, and managed to somehow get commission from the Budapest Jewish leadership, who were much more conservative than this guy. He was a bit of a kind of swashbuckling actor come negotiator, and he negotiated with Eichmann a deal, and some of the top German Nazis were involved, like Himmler and Kaltenbrunner, to have a limited number of Transylvanian Hungarian Jews, of the elite, really, of the sort of middle class, upper class, rich people, selected people, transported via Belsen. I don't know why via Belsen, but via Belsen to Switzerland, where they would be released, and in return for a large number of trucks to be used on the Eastern Front. That was a limitation; they couldn't be used on the Western Front. And I think, I'm not sure who paid for this. I think the richer part of this transport, and was some money and involved, and jewelry and certain material wanted by the Germans, like textiles for uniforms or whatever. And two such transports actually went via Belgium to Switzerland and were released. I think between 1,600 and a couple of thousand people. A lot of Kastner's own family, extended family, were involved, for example. It was selective, not anybody can. And he set up a kind of holding camp in Budapest, and I was and my family briefly in there. And this was in the grounds of an institute for the for the blind or the hard of hearing, one of those. They had large gardens and grounds, and there they set up these typical barracks where we slept on multiple bunks, you know, just like you could see in films.
Yeah. Was this towards the end of this 1944?
We're talking about 44 October, November.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were in there, and it was a very strange setup because outside it was guarded by SS guards, but mostly to stop people coming in, not going out. Inside there was Hungarian police. They were reasonably friendly. And you know, it wasn't anything like the harsh conditions of Belsen or some such place, but it was still unusual for somebody not used to camps. We had latrines. I remember being scared of the use of huge latrines instead of bathrooms and stuff like that. But I remember playing there and so on, so it wasn't a harsh situation. And you could leave. And I think one of the awful aspects of the Holocaust is that you couldn't make decisions safely because there were just rumors about this, that, the other, and that you had to make life saving or life risking decisions. Do you stay and trust the German deal, or do you try and go? At one point, the entire family left and went back to our flats. And from the flats, I was then taken up to the hills of Buda, near the royal castle. A very rich family, Hagermacher, brewers, the equivalent of Guinness family, really. And there were two big brewing families, very rich, and they had luxury villas in the Buda Hill. They weren't Jewish. German and Swiss connections they had. And they left for Switzerland ages before, when things got a bit risky that the Russians are coming. But they handed over their empty luxury villa for this purpose, and that's where we were taken up. They sent a gardener to carry us up, or carry me up, and you know, one by one, kids. And he carried me up in his arms. I was still small enough for that to be possible. And by that time, the Germans' relations with the Hungarian autocrat Horthy deteriorated, because Horthy just then, in the days that I was taken up, made a radio declaration that Hungary was leaving the alliance. And the Germans ringed round the royal castle, and we had to go past that, and a checkpoint. And I clearly remember the Germans' guns, field guns, pointing towards the castle. And the guy who took us up was stopped, but he had some mysterious papers. I imagine, and this is just my fantasy, that he must have at one point visited Germany in some privileged group and managed to get a piece of paper with Hitler's signature on it or something like that, because he showed this magic paper at the checkpoint to German, and they all stood to attention looking at it and just waved us past. And then I was ending up in this at that time quite well appointed building with all the kids collected up. This building and a series of others, I call it an archipelago of these homes, was organized, supplied by the Swiss Red Cross. They had one very able and courageous representative called Born, von Born, which actually hinted at that he was some kind of noble origin, which was completely made up, as was everything else. It was a bluff that these homes were extraterritorial to Hungary, under Swiss protection. There were no real documents to kind of prove that, but it was claimed, and Swiss flag was put up and all this. That was a critical. Now he was organizing it together with a group of Protestant churches. Formed a committee, which was called the Good Shepherd organization. They were partly the organizers of this, together with the Swiss. My uncle, one of my uncles, was part of that group. And he was Jewish, of course, but I don't know whether he was on false paper or just under the Swiss protection dared to do it. But this organization, the Good Shepherd thing, is mentioned in Tony Greenstein's book about Zionism, interestingly. A few times the Hungarian fascist groups, the Arrow Cross, who after the arrest of Horthy, the nationalist leader, sort of fascist, semi-fascist, fascist collaborator leader, was arrested by the German, and the outright extreme fascist groups, a bit like Smotrich, took over, and then things became really dangerous. They were the groups who would arrest Jews here, there, and everywhere, wherever they could find them in Budapest, and take them to the Danube and just shoot them into the Danube. No trial, nothing. I have a story of a friend of mine, a school friend, to whom this happened. He was arrested by this group, the Arrow Cross, with his mother, and taken and lined up by the shore of the Danube. There are parts of Danube which are served by steps going right down, and it's very nice. You can sit right by the river and sunbathe. But there are other parts which have a height above the Danube, and that's where they were taken and shot in. This particular friend was holding his mother's hand. They both landed in the Danube, and his mother just sunk right beside him, dead. But he was only shot through the arm. And the river, with its very strong current in the Danube, took him quickly downstream. And further down he scrambled out, and was overlooked from a house, adjacent house. And a good Samaritan guy came down and took him up, and he survived. After the war, he was my elementary school restarted, second year, and he was sitting right next to me. You know, we were in pairs in desks at desk, and he was my desk mate.
Yeah.
Very clever person by the name of György Ligeti,
Right.
like the composer.
Yeah.
I don't think any relation. And he was probably the best student, very bright, but extremely nervous. You know, he was traumatized.
Yeah, mother dying.
It's a horrific experience.
Yeah.
you cannot be but traumatized. Later, I don't know where he ended up. I think he was found by more distant relatives and taken abroad in the end.
Yeah. And did you have a lot of family who were taken or were killed around?
Yes, I did. I have one particular story which impacts on my immediate family. My Aunt Urgi, who later became one of the pretend Red Cross nurses looking after one group of boys. She was in the end in charge of our little group. We were all on false papers and false names, and we weren't allowed to recognize her as a relation. And although my two cousins, her two boys, were in the group. But before that, she had a niece staying with her who was a teenager, probably about 18 years old, around that time, 17, 18, something like that. And it was time for her to return to her family south of Hungary, in a Page area, the southern town. And she was taking her to the railway station to see her off. And they already said sort of goodbye. She was just about to board the train when one of these marauding Arrow Cross bands happened to come about and ask for papers, including her, just as she was about to board the train. And my aunt, from a distance, could see this. And they immediately arrested her. And my aunt couldn't intervene because she would have been arrested also. And she had to watch this girl being taken away by this fascist group. She was immediately transported to Auschwitz. Came back, actually. I know two women who came back from Auschwitz. I mean, one was she. But I remember, it's a memory of mine, that the aunt coming back from this experience, coming back home, she had a fit, a breakdown, shouting and crying and so on. That's a kind of what I call the invisible aspect of the Holocaust. And there are several like that, experiences like that. And I went to a few sessions at P21 Gallery, where they were reading letters from Gaza, people, daily experiences. And I was struck by how much similarity there was with their plight, with what I've seen around the Holocaust. Not only the destruction, but particularly this invisible aspect of having to make decisions in the dark. There were only rumors. Trust the Nazis with this deal, or not. Do you believe that if you go south it will be safe or not? What do you do with people who are ill and cannot come with you, and so on? These are terrific agonies that don't register. You see the bombing, and you know about the Holocaust, about people being shot and the gas chambers, but you don't see the invisible aspect. There were a few Nazi officers who were fanatical at trying to find, around that time, both Jews and and soldiers who absconded from the front. We had a hospital, a Jewish hospital, nearby. And this Nazi officer ordered the entire, all the patients and doctors and everybody down into a courtyard, and they were all killed. A hospital. So you then you couldn't tell what would happen. We were bombed out, but before that, we had this experience that a brigade of German fighters, when the front line reached us pretty nearly, came in with their machine gun and said, your villa is on a hill and you've got flat roof, we are going to put up the machine gun position there. And our leaders, the adults, sort of pleaded with them, said, look round, look at the number of children here. If you do that, we'll be targeted by Soviet artillery or Russian artillery, and that will be the end of all these children. Couldn't you go and find another building nearby which would serve without the children there? And believe it or not, the German brigade went. So the experience was rather mixed. But we were bombed out and had to move, and we went into a school which was temporarily used as a hospital. And again, it was quite a big building, complicated, and one German officer saw it as his business to search all the rooms upstairs and found one or two escaped soldiers and shot them, just like that. Some German officers of the Wehrmacht, the sort of regular soldiers, realized who we were and warned our leaders about this particular fanatical Nazi. He said, we have to go now, and you will be perhaps in greater danger because of this so-and-so officer. You got to watch out for him. Which is surprising. It just shows the confusion of war. All kinds of things happen.
Yeah. And when was the first time you saw a Russian?
Yes, well, we were in this, having moved 2 or 3 times by then, ended up in some other building, and it had good shelter, which was quite crowded, and you had to kind of come into it from a higher point through the door and steps down, and there we were, so camping in this space. One day, a Russian soldier appeared in the doorway. It was an amazing sight, great overcoat, machine gun hanging, and a large Cossack hat, and very fierce looking guy, and looked round and said, Nematsky, Nematsky. They were just interested whether there were German soldiers. We said, no Germans here. And he just went. And that was a moment of liberation. Some people who didn't like the idea of Russians and Soviet army and Red Army said, I think he was some kind of Eastern heritage guy. They said, his eyes don't look right even.
Yeah.
But generally, the Russian soldiers, particularly the first line, were friendly, although it was an enemy country, basically, and handed out soup and bread and so on. I remember doing it. I've been joining all the marches. I think I've been on something like 7 marches so far, and my experience of them is that they are very friendly places, and lots of families with children there, and they are the very opposite of what they are accused of being, what it is accused of being. They are not hate marches, they are the exact opposite.